Podcast.
Welcome to Our Weird World. I'm your host, John Henson, and today it is the start of a new month. We are into June, and that means it is time for another Weird Fun Bag. Like I mentioned last week, this is the last Weird Fun Bag until November, because we got a lot of culty stuff happening throughout the rest of the summer, and then we got Serial Killer September and our spooky stuff in October. So first, we got to get to the summer of cult. We got a couple more weeks to go before we get there, and today it is the 19th Weird Fun Bag. We are looking at the stories of the female stranger, the Leatherman, and our first story is of the Piedmont Easter.
Story time. Story time. Story time? Story time.
We start in France in 1173 when Peter Valdo renounced his wealth in favor of living a minimal life preaching. It's spelled like Peter Waldo, but I'm pretty sure the W is pronounced like a V, and you'll see why later on. But this dude, he renounced his wealth, all the wealth that you can, I guess, have in 1173 in France, in favor of living a minimal life preaching. His actions then inspired other Catholics to follow his example, and the Waldensians were born. This group was quickly characterized by their voluntary poverty and their strict adherence to whatever the Bible said. They ultimately began disobeying the Third Lateran Council, which sounds like an important thing. I don't know what it is, but, you know, the Catholics, they had all kinds of councils and decrees, and they always pissed somebody off. And because it was, you know, really more about government control rather than, I don't know, maybe doing what Jesus would have actually done. Anyway, so basically this Third Lateran Council had a lot of like official church interpretations of the Bible. A lot of it went against what the Waldensians believed in, and so they continued to preach their own interpretation of the Bible, oftentimes being in direct opposition to the Catholic Church, which in 1184 especially, but, you know, in general in the medieval times, in the Middle Ages, you don't go and oppose the Catholic Church. But they did, and by 1184, Valdo and his followers were excommunicated and labeled as heretics. Over the next few centuries, though, the Waldensians continued to exist. They continued to meet in secret, traveling from town to town in carefully organized patterns to avoid capture by the Catholic Church, who at this point was ready to execute them all, as they did, because that's what Jesus would have done, guys. When the Protestant Reformation took place, the Waldensians decided to align themselves with the Protestants and became more visible, making their unofficial headquarters in the Piedmont region of northern Italy. Now, this means nothing to anyone else, but this always, when I first came across this story, I had never heard of the Piedmont region of Italy because I grew up in North Carolina, and North Carolina has its own Piedmont region. And there's a crazy connection here at the end, which we'll get to. But yeah, like there's a region of North Carolina, and it kind of varies depending on like what kind of map you look at. But it's essentially like the middle part of North Carolina is considered the Piedmont, and it's, you know, just characterized by hills. It's where the Uwharrie Mountains are, and the foothills. It's kind of, you know, the Uwharrie Mountains and then kind of the foothills of the Appalachian Mountains. And that's the Piedmont of North Carolina. And I thought that was just like a name that was unique to the state. But apparently it comes from, I guess, Italy and their Piedmont region, which is mostly different, a lot better food, I think, you know, in northern Italy. You got, I think Tuscany is up there. Milan, all the fancy fashion places, all those places up in northern Italy in their Piedmont region, still kind of hilly, but probably a little bit more mountainous compared to North Carolina. Anyway, no one cares about this, but that's how my brain works. So these Valdensians, they continue to exist for like another 400, 500 years. And by the 1600s, the Catholic Church, they're super tired of these people, plus all the other Protestant groups, and continued to try to just persecute them, execute as many of them as they could, because if you disagree with the Catholic Church, then you disagree with Jesus. Not really, but that's what they say. And we're just going to kill you if you're not going to do our version of Jesus. And so the Valdensians ended up dispersing along with other Protestant groups all over Europe. But many, the core group continued to stay in the Piedmont region of Italy. In January of 1655, the Duke of Savoy explicitly commanded the 15 Valdensians in the area to attend a Catholic Mass. If they refused, he threatened to expel them from the region entirely. And to the Duke's surprise, the Valdensians converted to Catholicism on Easter Sunday, and that's what this is all about. And that's just a fun little story of how a group became Catholic, and the Catholicism, forced spread worked. Anyway, on to the next story. No, I'm kidding. Of course, that's not what happened. Instead, the Valdensians just expelled themselves to other areas of Italy. But the Duke of Savoy, he wasn't happy with that. Even though he got what he wanted, he didn't really want that. And he really wanted them to attend Mass. So he coerced the Italian government into falsifying reports of local uprisings led by Valdensians that somebody needed to quell. And so in April, the Italian government hired the Duke of Savoy's army to go into the Piedmont area and begin massacring every Valdensian in sight. Children, and this is like documented, right? Like children were basically just ripped out of their mother's arms and just like bashed onto rocks. Older Valdensians were burned alive in their homes. Others were just like taken out and had their arms and legs chopped off. This got dark really quick. Like I started with a misdirection, and then just out of nowhere, just gruesome graphic murder. Cool. It's not done yet either. Some Valdensians were flayed. Some were disemboweled. Some were tied to trees while a soldier just like walked up to them and literally just cut their heart out in front of them. Some had their brains boiled and eaten by the Savoyard army. Others were turned into human plows in their own fields, which I don't even know how that works. Like, I guess you just, you attach them to a plow and then like face first into the dirt just to till the ground with the face. I don't know. Other people were buried alive, and it's going to keep getting worse. Fathers were forced to march themselves to death with their own decapitated children's heads around their necks, while other parents were forced to watch their children be raped to death, all in the name of Catholic Jesus. Because, look, guys, if there's anything that we learned from the Jesus Christ episode a few weeks ago, it's that Jesus, he didn't care. All right. He was going to do what he wanted to do. And, this idea of a very peaceful, passive, turn the other cheek, Jesus is not really who Jesus is. The Catholic Church, they read all those infancy gospels and they were like, that's our Jesus. All right. We are going to hardcore, we're going to rape kids to death. Because, I think teenage Jesus, when he was all horny and whatnot, he definitely would have done that. He would have raped other kids to death. And so that's what we're going to do. And so in what came to be known as the Piedmont Easter, as many as 6,000 Valdensians were slaughtered. Unsurprisingly, news of this massacre outraged the rest of Europe. Several countries banded together to help relocate the remaining Valdensians to safety. And here's the kind of the local tie here. The group was eventually given religious and civil freedom in 1848, and today there are Valdensian groups located all over the world and are generally parts of other Christian denominations, including Methodist and Presbyterians. And the town of Valdez in North Carolina, kind of in the Piedmont region, is all about, like, it was and still, I guess, is a Valdensian community. They even do like their own little play about probably not exactly the Piedmont Easter, but something very similar to it. It's just, I don't know, it's a neat little small piece of North Carolina history. Moving on now to March of 1834, when a poem was published in the Alexandria Gazette in Alexandria, Virginia, that recounted a visit to the grave of the female stranger at the cemetery at St. Paul's Episcopal Church in Alexandria. The poem was originally anonymous, but was later found to have been written by Susan Ridgey Dallum Morgan from Baltimore after her husband posthumously published her works. In 1836, 2 years later, an article by someone named Lucy Seymour appeared in the Philadelphia Saturday Courier, though, again, it was, Susan Morgan using a pen name. So, in this story, or poem, or whatever, this female stranger was a young, mentally ill immigrant who was in a somewhat abusive relationship with her male companion. The stranger often confided in the local pastor about her troubles, but nothing ever seemed to be done until she died in 1816. Shortly after her funeral, her anonymous partner disappeared, leaving behind a headstone at the cemetery that read, "To the memory of a female stranger whose mortal sufferings terminated on the 14th day of October, 1816, aged 23 years and 8 months. This stone is placed here by her disconsolate husband, in whose arms she sighed out her latest breath, and under who God did his utmost even to soothe the cold dead ear of death." Oh, such language. Such language back then, right? Like, that, we're getting dumber as a society, Like, headstones back then. I'm not even done with what was on the headstone, by the way. It's just, like, language back then was so flowery and sophisticated, a little wordy, right? They took their time to explain things, but it's just so poignant and accurate. And meanwhile, like, headstones today would just be like, Dave, born August 31st, 1967, died in your arms tonight. Must have been something you said. That's a Kyle Kinane bit. Like, I'm not going to take credit for that, but you get the point, right? It's just like, it's dumb. It's very stupid. And like, nothing meaningful. Anyway, the rest of the headstone said, "How loved, how valued once avails thee not, to whom related or by whom begot. A heap of dust alone remains of thee. 'Tis all thou art, and all the proud shall be. To him gave all the prophets witness, that through his name whosoever believeth in him shall receive remission of sins." So Susan Morgan, who more or less kind of quote unquote discovered this female stranger's headstone, really became invested into who this woman was and looked for answers as to who she was, what her identity was. In 1848, the Alexandria Gazette published a response to a previously written article that appeared in the Baltimore Sun that described this mysterious woman as beautiful with a pale complexion. The author in this response also revealed that the man's name was Claremont and that he had used $1,500 in counterfeit bills to pay off some of her debts. In 1886, Frank George Carpenter wrote a story in the Hyde Park Herald implying that the female stranger was Aaron Burr's long-lost daughter, Theodosia Burr Alston. The following year, Fred D. Massey wrote a story for the Cincinnati Commercial Gazette. Why are all these papers from around the country picking up this story? I don't know. But the Cincinnati Commercial Gazette said that a noble English couple had arrived in Alexandria, with the woman quickly becoming ill and dying before her husband fled to New Orleans. The husband was then rumored to have returned to Alexandria to exhume his wife's body and take it back with him to New Orleans. Now, most retellings of this story follow a plot line that suggests that the female stranger and her husband had arrived in Alexandria from a foreign country, and that the husband had decided to briefly stay in the city to care for his wife, who had since fallen ill. Everyone involved was sworn to secrecy about the couple's identity, and when the female stranger died, the husband was the only one to prepare the coffin and seal it shut. The husband would then return every fall to place flowers on the grave, and then later an elderly couple began visiting the site, claiming that they were relatives of this girl. No one has any idea who this woman was, who the female stranger was, and most people who have written about it believe that it was Theodosia Burr Alston. However, history has very firm belief that she died at sea shortly after the War of 1812. And because it was such a high-profile death, seeing as her father was the vice president at one point, several rumors and sightings quickly popped up after her disappearance, focusing either on the North Carolina coast or, oddly enough, the Texas coast. Although Theodosia Burr Alston was 29 when she died, and the female stranger's headstone reads a death at 23 years old, people still really believe that the female stranger was Theodosia Burr. However, the reality is that no one knows who this woman actually was, and thanks to history and people trying to be fun and cool and creative, there's a lot of stories out there about who this woman was, and no one really knows who anymore. But you can go visit her grave at the St. Paul Episcopal Church Cemetery in Alexandria, Virginia, if you ever wanted to for some reason. Anyway, our final story, beginning in 1870, newspapers in towns between the Hudson and Connecticut River valleys began running stories about the Leatherman, this haggard-looking old dude who always wore the same outfit of a hat, a scarf, multiple coats, and shoes, all made of handmade boot leather, weighing basically like 60 pounds. Just 60 pounds of leather on this dude all day, every day. But long before these stories were ever printed, this dude had already been well known in the area, having made a consistent 365-mile loop every year since 1857. So for the last 13 years, this old dude, just began walking 365 miles in a loop every year in, kind of this area of New England, between the Hudson and Connecticut River valleys. Autism, 100%, or PTSD. Like, dude just had an emotional breakdown. I mean, again, 1857, I don't think there was like any big wars going on, autism. Really, like, so many things. As I learn more about the autism spectrum and everything, so many things and so many people from history can be very easily explained. Just probably autism. I will fight you on that. Like, I don't have a good example right now, but that's probably it. This dude, and here's the thing, he was so reliable and predictable on his route that people started having food ready for him as he passed through. And he often stopped to eat on his donor's footsteps. So, look, I mean, after 4 or 5 years, the same dude's coming around, the Leatherman, it's June 2nd. The Leatherman's coming around today. He should be coming in from the south or whatever. I don't know. Let's leave out some corned beef hash for him or something. I don't know. Whatever they were eating back then. He rarely spoke whenever someone tried to talk to him. And if he did, he typically used one-syllable words. Autism. That's not the word he said. That's what you get it. According to some of the rumors, the Leatherman came from Picardy, France, which made sense considering he spoke fluent French. Anytime someone would ask him about his background, he would end the conversation and just walk away. He also never accepted meat on Fridays, leading many to believe that he was Catholic. The kids in the towns that he frequented were big fans of his, even if he looked really creepy. Because, again, he's homeless, like he's not shaving, and he's just got all of this leather on him. He would often give the children shiny new pennies in exchange for their worn ones, which is weird. And during the harsh winter months, the Leatherman would hunker down in natural rock shelters in the area and build a fire. Oftentimes his face would be frostbitten and frozen, but he never ended up losing any extremities. In 1888, the Connecticut Humane Society had him arrested and hospitalized for quote-unquote emotional affliction, but doctors examined him, he was deemed sane, and was released. Finally, on March 24th, 1889, the Leatherman's body was found with a French Catholic prayer book in his arms in a cave near Mount Pleasant, New York, having died from mouth cancer from all of the tobacco that he used. A few days later, an article appeared in the Waterbury Daily American claiming that the Leatherman was actually named Jules Bourglet, from Lyons, France. He had fallen in love with a wealthy leather merchant who had convinced him to start trading leather as his profession. Somehow things went wrong and sent his entire family into financial ruin. And then, consumed with guilt, the man fled to the United States and spent the rest of his life as a vagabond. The problem was that this entire story was faked as a way to sell papers to capitalize on news of this character's death that everybody knew about. However, by the time the story had been officially retracted, the Bourglet name had been inscribed on his tombstone. Today, no one really knows who the Leatherman actually was, though some speculate he was a fugitive or someone with autism. Like me, I speculate that, but other people also speculated that. His body was buried near Ossining, New York, along Route 9. However, when the road was upgraded in 2011, the gravesite had to be renewed. But when they exhumed the body, his corpse was nowhere to be found. Like, the coffin was empty. That apparently wasn't a big deal, and the coffin nails that they found, which was the only trace of him that was left, were reburied in a new pine box farther up the road.
All done.
There you go. Weird fun bag, number 19 in the books. Let us recap and see what we learned today.
What did we learn?
Number one, the Valdensians, a group of Catholics who didn't really agree with the official Catholic Church. And you can't do that because then you get executed. And boy, did they. Because the Duke of Savoy just massacred those people in the most Jesus-like ways. Just the most Jesus-y ways possible. But a group of Valdensians did immigrate to America. There's a bunch of different Valdensian groups in America, but settled the town of Valdese in North Carolina, western North Carolina, just on the other side of Hickory. And they've got a little church there. They do a play, kind of like, you know, if you've been to the Outer Banks and you did the play with the Lost Colony, they have their own little version of that. So I don't know, man. I don't know what it is about plays, because there's also the Unto These Hills in Cherokee that the Cherokee do. Are plays like a big deal? Are there other plays around the country, or is North Carolina just like a weird place where these groups of people put on plays or dramas? They're not even called plays; they're dramas. Whatever. Anyway, I don't know. Number two, the Female Stranger, a grave in Alexandria, Virginia. No one knows who she is. A lot of people think it was Aaron Burr's daughter. It's not. It's definitely not. But then, you know, a lot of people took some liberties, some very creative liberties with the story, made up some stuff, but no one knows who this woman actually was. And then number three, same thing with the Leatherman, some random French dude, probably with autism, just roaming around the Connecticut and New York hills with 60 pounds of leather on him at all times and just making a loop until he eventually died. God, did this loop for over 30 years, 32 years, from 1857 to 1889. Just this same 365-mile loop. That's autism for sure.
What did we learn?
Next week on the show, we are getting political again. It is part 2 of Pathetic Politics, part 1, back on episode 208. I got 5 stories of just people who in the political world, whether they were elected politicians or they tried to get elected or whatever the case was, Just real stupid. Just real stupid and scary that like these are the same kinds of people that get elected. And I'll talk more about that next week. But man, looking at the stories of Eddie Haymore, William Langer, Manuel Herrick, John Wilson, and the congressional brawl. Another one, we covered one in the first episode. There's more than one in history, believe it or not. But that is it. Thank you so much for continuing to listen. Keep telling all your friends and keep it weird.
This is a podcast